I stood in the ballroom, the golden chandeliers blazing above me, their light cascading down like 1,000 stars. In my trembling hands lay a necklace, not just any piece of jewelry, but the last reminder of my late wife, Margaret. She had worn it on our wedding day, her laughter like music as the diamonds caught the light. It was her heart, her legacy, and tonight I was ready to pass it on to our daughter Emily as a gift of love and continuity. The room was alive with the hum of celebration glasses, clinking violins, whispering in the background, conversations weaving together in a tapestry of joy. At the head table I rose slowly, my chest tight, but my resolve firm. Every eye turned toward me, the father of the bride. Tonight I began, my voice steady, though the weight of memory pressed against it. We celebrate Emily and Trevor. My daughter, my pride, my joy. Emily, this is for you. I opened the velvet box, revealing the necklace. The diamonds shimmered, scattering shards of light across the marble floor. Each sparkle a whisper from Margaret. The guests drew in their breath, an audible wave of awe washing through the hall. Emily's eyes glistened, though she did not meet mine. I stepped toward her, holding out the necklace, a bridge between past and future, a mother's love carried into a daughter's life. And then Trevor spoke. With a smirk that sliced the air, my new son-in-law leaned forward, his voice dripping with contempt. "What is this, Henry, some cheap trinket from a pawn shop?" The words struck like a whip. The silence in the room shattered, replaced by a ripple of uneasy laughter. A few guests chuckled nervously, then fell quiet, their eyes darting between us. My hand froze mid-air, the necklace trembling in my grasp. Emily looked down at the table, her fingers knotting the napkin, her silence louder than any defense. The betrayal was not just in Trevor's insult, but in her refusal to speak to shield her father from humiliation. Then with a flick of his hand, Trevor knocked the velvet box from mine. It hit the table with a hollow thud, the necklace spilling across the cloth like a cascade of fallen tears. "Really, Henry," he drawled, "you couldn't even buy something new." This time the laughter was bolder, crueler. Heat surged into my face, not from shame, but from a rage that burned slow and deliberate, like embers stoked back to life. I had been ready moments before to announce the true gift. An apartment in Manhattan, a penthouse, a home that would have been theirs, a symbol of my blessing and love. But Trevor's disdain, his venom, and Emily's silence shattered that plan. I forced a smile, masking the storm within me. "Enjoy the evening," I said evenly, my voice calm, though my hands trembled. Then I turned, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the pity in their eyes. The marble floor echoed beneath my steps as I left the ballroom. Each step felt heavier, as if Margaret herself walked beside me, sharing in my sorrow. When I pushed through the grand doors, the night air hit my face like a cold slap, sharp and cleansing. In the car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. The city rushed past in streaks of neon and shadows, honking taxis and faceless crowds, a world that neither knew nor cared what had just been broken inside me. That necklace wasn't just a gift. It was Margaret's heart, her memory, the one piece of her I still had to offer Emily. And Emily's silence, her refusal to lift her eyes to mine, cut deeper than Trevor's cruelty ever could. By the time I reached the old house in Brooklyn, its walls sagging under the weight of decades, my anger had hardened into something colder. Justice, not the kind born of anger, but of precision. They had humiliated me, mocked my love, trampled on Margaret's legacy. And in that quiet, creaking house, I swore to myself I would not let this betrayal go unanswered. I sat in the old leather armchair, the one so worn and cracked it still carried the faint imprint of Margaret's shape. She used to curl up in it for hours, a book resting on her knees, humming softly while I worked at the desk across the room. Now it was only me, the shadows, and the weight of silence. A single lamp burned in the corner, casting its amber glow across the walls, softening the edges of the past that lingered here. The air smelled of aged wood and faint traces of coffee, a scent that had stubbornly clung to this house for more than 15 years, unchanged, unyielding. In my hands was a photograph. Margaret and Emily caught in a summer afternoon. They were laughing in the garden sunlight, tangling itself in their hair like threads of gold. Margaret's hand on Emily's shoulder, Emily's head thrown back in unrestrained joy. That image, frozen in time, was both balm and blade. My thumb lingered on Emily's smile, tracing the curve of it as if I could somehow bring it back. but the warmth in that picture felt galaxies away from the coldness of the ballroom. That night, it still burned. Trevor's sneer, Emily's silence, the way she couldn't even lift her eyes to defend me, or her mother's memory. The wound they carved was deeper than humiliation. It was betrayal etched into my bones. I set the photo down with trembling fingers and opened the album resting on the coffee table. The pages turned with a faint crackle, each one a testament to the life I'd built, the sacrifices I'd made, the thread of devotion that had always tied me to my daughter. Emily at 6, her tiny hand clutching mine as we crossed the street on her first day of school. Her other hand held a pink lunchbox far too big for her, but her eyes sparkled with pride. Margaret had been gone by then. I had carried the weight of 2 hearts trying to fill the emptiness her absence left. Nights blurred into mornings on Wall Street. I traded sleep, traded years of my life in exchange for private school fees, tutors, the chance for Emily to rise above. I flipped the page. Emily at 10. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her tongue poking out in fierce concentration as she scrawled on a piece of colored paper. A Father's Day card. The words uneven but bold. "You're my hero, Daddy." I still had that card tucked in a drawer. The paper was creased now, the ink faded, but every time I saw it, my chest ached with both pride and loss. Where had that little girl gone? At 20, she called me from college, her voice bright but strained. Tuition was overwhelming her. "Daddy, can you help?" she'd asked. And of course I had. I sold a chunk of my investments without hesitation. I told her not to worry, that she should focus on her studies, on her dreams. She promised she'd visit soon, that she'd come home for a weekend. But the visits never came. The calls grew shorter, the excuses sharper. And then, Trevor. The album offered me his face standing beside Emily at a gala. She was 28. Her arm was looped through his, her smile polished but hollow. Not the free, untamed joy from the garden photo. Something about it felt practiced, as though she'd learned how to smile for the world, but not for me anymore. "Busy with Trevor," she would say in her clipped texts, as if I were an afterthought in the life I had given everything to build for her. I closed the album, unable to bear it any longer. The memories were pressing in walls too tight around me, suffocating. I rose, pacing the living room. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight like the house itself grieved with me. My heart pounded with a bitter rhythm. I had given Emily everything, my time, my fortune, my future. And in return, I had been humiliated in front of strangers, mocked, discarded, while the last piece of Margaret's love was tossed aside like trash. I went to the drawer and pulled out the Father's Day card, running my fingers across the faded ink. I stared at it, my jaw tight, until the ache in my chest turned into something sharper, harder. The past was gone. Clinging to it would only weaken me. Slowly, I slid the card back, closing the drawer with a soft, decisive click. When I caught my reflection in the mirror across the room, I hardly recognized the man staring back. Gray hair, tired eyes, lines etched by years of sacrifice. But there in the depths of that gaze, something had returned. A spark, a fire, not of despair, but of resolve. They thought they could belittle me, reduce me to nothing. They thought my silence meant surrender. But they were wrong. Not Trevor, not even Emily. I straightened my shoulders. It was time to fight back. The next morning, my office on Wall Street greeted me like an old ally. The glass walls framed the Manhattan skyline, sharp, cold, unyielding, just like the decision taking shape within me. The hum of the trading floor buzzed faintly beyond the door, the language of money filling the air. My desk, polished oak and solid as a fortress, bore the weight of monitors flashing streams of numbers and deals. Normally, this was my world profit risk reward. But today, profit wasn't my pursuit. Today, it was justice. Trevor's mocking words echoed in my mind over and over until they hardened into something unbreakable. His smirk, his disdain, the way Emily looked away. They thought they'd humiliated me. They thought I'd walk away quietly. But they had awakened the wrong man, and I would make sure they learned exactly what that meant. Emily's silence was worse than any insult. Words could wound, but silence, her silence, was betrayal in its purest form. I had spent years forgiving the distance, convincing myself that her choices were just detours, not rejections. I excused her absences, her clipped replies, her shifting loyalties. I told myself a father's love must stretch far enough to cover even the coldest of winters, but no more. I opened the drawer of my desk with a slow, deliberate hand. Inside lay a photo of Emily at her college graduation. Her smile in that picture was unguarded, radiant, the smile of a girl who had once called me her hero. For a moment, I let myself believe in that memory and the version of her that had once needed me. My thumb brushed the glossy edge, then I slid it back and shut the drawer with finality. Sentiment would not serve me now. What I needed was resolve. I picked up the phone and dialed an old friend. Jack, a man whose knowledge of the city's financial underbelly was as sharp as a scalpel. When he answered, his gravelly voice carried the wear of decades in smoky backrooms. Jack, I said, steady and unflinching. I need information on Trevor Cunningham, his deals, his partners, his weaknesses. Everything. Jack chuckled as if he'd been waiting for this call. Knew this day might come. Give me a few days, Henry. You sure about this? I tightened my grip on the receiver until the cord dug into my palm. I've never been more sure. When I hung up, the silence in the room seemed to hum with anticipation. I turned toward the stack of reports on my desk, flipping through pages where Trevor's name appeared like a thread weaving through recklessness. Risky ventures, volatile markets, his ambition was a fire burning too hot, bound to consume him. But fire could be directed, controlled. I underlined the names of his key investors, men I had known for decades, men whose loyalty could be bought not with money, but with memory and favors long owed. My pulse steadied, my mind once clouded by grief and humiliation, sharpened to a point. This was my world, my battlefield. Trevor was a novice trespassing on terrain I had spent my life mastering. I opened a fresh notebook and began to write. Step by step, line by line, I mapped Trevor's world, his connections, his cracks, the places where a whisper of doubt or a delayed payment could unravel everything. Precision had built my career, and precision would destroy him. My pen scratched faster across the page, each stroke a quiet promise. Trevor thought himself untouchable. Soon he would learn the cost of arrogance. I rose from my chair and walked to the window. Manhattan spread before me, sharp, relentless, indifferent. Yet in that moment, the chaos below seemed small, distant. For the first time in weeks, I felt control seeping back into my veins. I gathered the file thick with names, documents, and leverage points and tucked it under my arm. Its weight was no longer paper, it was inevitability. Trevor would pay, and Emily, blinded by her loyalty to him, would see. She would see the cost of betrayal written in ruin. I stepped into the elevator, my reflection staring back at me in the polished steel doors. Gray hair, hardened eyes, but behind them a resolve burning like steel pulled from fire. This was only the beginning. The next evening I found myself in a cramped cafe on Manhattan's Lower East Side. The air was heavy with the bitter scent of overbrewed coffee, the windows fogged from the damp chill of the street outside. In a corner booth, I sat waiting as the cracked leather seat groaned beneath me. A man slid into the seat across from me. Carl, a private investigator, wiry and worn with fingers yellowed by nicotine. He carried a battered briefcase, which he unlatched with a metallic click. His voice was low, gravelly, carrying the kind of weight only years of secrets could carve. You wanted dirt on Cunningham, he muttered, sliding the case toward me. Here it is. I opened the folder inside. Pages spilled across the table, financial records riddled with discrepancies, emails laced with arrogance, grainy photographs marked with red ink. Each page was a scar, each note a dagger aimed at Trevor's carefully polished image. Fraud, shady partnerships, unreported losses. I flipped through the evidence, my eyes lingering on one photograph in particular. Trevor hand clasped with a man I recognized, a man whose empire had crumbled years ago under the weight of scandal. Trevor wasn't just reckless. He was dirty. I leaned back, a slow smile curling at the edge of my mouth. The city outside bustled on, unaware that in this dingy cafe the first domino had already been set into motion. Trevor thought he had won Emily's heart, but soon he would learn that he had stepped into my world. And in my world, debts are always collected. Trevor's hand lingered in a firm shake with a man I knew all too well, a hedge fund predator, a shark who never hesitated to cut ties the instant a venture smelled of blood. Carl's nicotine-stained finger tapped the photograph. He's overextended, he said in that gravelly voice of his. One push, Henry. Just one, and he's finished. My pulse quickened, steady but hard, like a war drum echoing in my chest. This was the lever I had been hunting. The fulcrum on which Trevor Cunningham's fragile empire would teeter and collapse. But then as I leafed through the papers, a single line caught my eye. An email. His words leapt off the page with venomous arrogance. "Don't worry, darling. Your father's money will always bail us out." The breath left me in a sharp exhale, my stomach twisting into something sour and bitter. Emily, my Emily, reduced to a bargaining chip, a pawn in Trevor's ruthless game. My daughter's trust, my life sacrifices, weaponized against me. I closed the folder with deliberate force, my fingers whitening as they pressed against the leather edges. His arrogance would be his undoing, but the sting of Emily's silence cut far deeper than I had braced for. That afternoon, I found myself standing outside their glass and stone fortress on the Upper East Side. The doorman, clad in a perfect Navy uniform, tipped his hat with a polished courtesy, but his eyes slid away as if sensing the storm behind mine. The elevator hummed, carrying me upward into their world of hollow opulence. The penthouse greeted me with cold air, perfumed by lilies, their sweetness masking a sterile emptiness. Gilded mirrors crowded the walls, each one reflecting back the same lifeless marble and untouched furniture. This wasn't a home. It was a showroom, a theater stage where love had no place. Emily appeared first, her smile stretched too thin, as if painted on at the last second. Her fingers fidgeted with a bracelet, twisting and tugging. My heart clenched at the sight, my daughter nervous in her own house. Trevor, of course, played his part with casual arrogance, sprawled across a velvet sofa, whiskey glass, dangling like a prop in his performance. Henry, he drawled, his tone thick with false warmth. "Always a pleasure." I offered a polite nod, though every word he spoke was like acid on the walls. I had come under the pretense of a fatherly visit, but my gaze was sharp, cataloging everything, the ease with which he dismissed me, the smug tilt of his mouth, the condescension dripping from his laugh when I mentioned the wedding. Emily tried her voice thin. "How's work, Dad?" she asked, her eyes darting to him, then back to me. "Busy as always," I answered lightly, though my chest tightened when my eyes snagged on something else, a drawer left half open by the sofa. Inside lay the velvet box from the wedding. Margaret's necklace, her mother's necklace, carelessly tossed aside like some gaudy trinket from a pawn shop. A heat rose in me, sharp and burning, but I swallowed it, keeping my expression steady. Trevor rambled on, boasting about his latest ventures, words dripping with bravado. "You wouldn't understand, Henry," he said with a lazy chuckle. "Old school finance is dead. This is the new world." I nodded, letting him speak, letting him dig his own grave with every syllable. Emily excused herself, murmuring something about coffee, and I followed. In the kitchen, the polished counters gleamed too brightly, the sterile order clashing with the tremble in her hands as she fumbled with the coffee maker. "Everything okay?" I asked softly. She nodded too quickly. "Fine, Dad. Just busy." Her voice cracked on that last word. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. Back in the living room, Trevor's phone buzzed on the glass table. He picked it up, his expression darkening, the mask slipping for just a second. His jaw tightened, the whiskey glass trembling ever so slightly. In that moment, I knew Carl's report had only scratched the surface. Trevor's empire was already beginning to buckle. I left soon after, my briefcase heavy with documents, but heavier still with resolve. In the back seat of the car, I pulled out a single sheet, a list of Trevor's investors' names written in clean black ink. Men I knew, men who owed me favors, men whose trust in Trevor I could shatter with a whisper. The city blurred past the window, Manhattan's lights burning against the dusk like cold, sharp stars. I tightened my grip on the file. Trevor had built his empire on sand, and I would be the tide that dragged it all away. And when the dust settled, Emily would see the truth, see who Trevor truly was, and who her father had always been. My office on Wall Street loomed like a citadel of power-glass steel and silence. The only sound was the steady hum of my computer, faint yet insistent like a war drum, waiting for its signal. Beyond the wide pane of glass, the skyline glittered towers, stabbing at the night sky, each one a monument to ambition and greed. I had fought on this battlefield for decades, clawing my way up, weathering storms that would have broken lesser men. But tonight was different. Tonight, the war was personal. The cursor blinked in the half-lit room, a small pulse against the darkness. The draft email sat open before me, cold precise, its file attachment, loaded like a dagger waiting to be plunged. Carl's report, cleaned of all traces of its origin, laid bare Trevor Cunningham's missteps, his arrogance etched into numbers and transactions, his empire built on rotten beams. One click. That was all it would take. One click and Trevor's carefully crafted world would begin to collapse brick by brick, betrayal by betrayal. My finger hovered over the mouse, but hesitation tightened around me like a noose. Emily's face rose unbidden in my mind, her hesitant smile in that sterile apartment, her hands fidgeting with a bracelet, while Trevor drowned himself in whiskey and bravado. I saw Margaret's necklace again, discarded in that drawer, as though the past our family meant nothing. The thought pierced deeper than I wanted to admit. Emily, my daughter, blood of my blood, yet she had chosen him, his world of glass promises and lies, over mine. Over me. She'd made her decision, and no amount of fatherly warning or pleading could change that now. My hand steadied. I couldn't save her from herself. Not anymore. With a breath sharp and final, I pressed send. The faint click echoed through the stillness like a gunshot. The email vanished, invisible wires carrying it across the city, into the inboxes of the bank's boardroom, where reputations could shatter overnight. A strange calm settled over me, steadying my heartbeat. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt clarity, hard, merciless, undeniable. Across town, Trevor's fortress was already beginning to crack. I pictured him there in his sleek office, all chrome and glass, the mask slipping from his smug face. Jack's message had already warned me the board had called an emergency meeting. I could almost hear the scene unfold. Trevor Tighe, loosened papers scattered across his desk like leaves in a storm. And Harov, the bank's titan, steel-haired and sharper-eyed than most men half his age, standing over him, report in hand. Explain this, Cunningham. Harov's voice would thunder, slicing through Trevor's excuses. Trevor, flushed and defensive, would bluster, deny, rage against shadows. It's lies. Fabrications. Someone's trying to frame me. But charm only works when there's still trust. And Trevor's trust was dissolving faster than the ice in his untouched whiskey. Meanwhile, back in that marble-clad apartment, Emily would be pacing her phone, clutched in trembling hands. I could almost hear her voice, sharp with panic, accusing. You told me everything was fine. Trevor's answer would be clipped, dismissive, defensive. It's fine, Emily. Stay out of it. She'd hang up, confusion and fear twisting in her chest, the ring on her finger, catching the light like a shackle. She wouldn't know it was me who had set this avalanche in motion. Perhaps she'd suspect. Perhaps deep down she'd even know. The thought stung like acid, but I forced it down. Back in my office, the glow of the screen shifted. A news ticker refreshed, and there it was. Cunningham Group faces internal review. Buried in the financial section, just a whisper of a headline. But I didn't need bold letters. Whispers spread faster, cutting deeper than screams. It was enough. The first fracture in his empire. I closed the laptop with a quiet snap. The sound was final, like a door locking or a coffin lid sealing. In the reflection of the darkened screen, I saw my own face staring back at me. Older, hardened by years of battles and betrayals, but alive with purpose I thought I'd lost. I had drawn first blood, and God help me, it felt good. Too good. My phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Jack, boards digging deeper. Trevor's on thin ice. A slow smile tugged at my lips. Outside, the city hummed with its endless rhythm horns, footsteps, deals struck, and dreams broken. It pulsed like a living thing, and tonight it pulsed in time with me. I slipped my coat over my shoulders, gathering the folder, the reports, the remnants of Trevor's kingdom in my hands. Yet as I stood in the doorway, the weight of it all pressed against me with a question I didn't want to answer. How far was I willing to go? I silenced the thought, forcing it back into the shadows. That was for later. Tonight only one truth mattered. I had started something that could not be undone, and I would see it through. Trevor and Emily had no idea what storm was gathering around them, and I intended to keep it that way. The restaurant on Manhattan's Upper West Side was a sanctuary of muted elegance, dim chandeliers casting pools of golden light, the clink of crystal glasses blending with low murmurs of wealth and privilege. The air was thick with the aroma of truffles and aged wine indulgence woven into every detail. I sat across from them, the pristine white tablecloth stretched between us like a fragile barrier, a truce none of us believed in. Trevor's fork tapped rhythmically against his plate, his movements too precise, too calculated, as though even dining was another performance. His narrowed eyes flicked toward me, sharp with suspicion, testing, probing. Emily sat beside him, twisting her wedding ring as though it were a chain around her finger. Her gaze darted to other tables, searching for distraction, for escape. This dinner had been billed as reconciliation, an attempt to smooth the cracks in our fractured family, but beneath the polite facade, tension hissed like steam from a sealed kettle. Trevor leaned forward, his voice low but barbed, each word chosen to wound. "You've been awfully quiet, Henry. Not meddling in things that don't concern you, I hope." The remark was meant as a jab, but it landed like a declaration of war. I lifted my glass of water, letting the ice clink against its sides, and took a slow sip. My face was calm, practiced the mask of a man who had fought too many battles to show his hand early. "I'm just here for dinner, Trevor," I said evenly. But inside my mind was cataloging every flicker of his expression, the sheen of sweat at his temple, the tight pull of his jaw, the smile that never touched his eyes. Emily cut in, her voice thin, brittle. "Dad, Trevor's just stressed. Work's been tough." Her eyes searched his face for reassurance, but Trevor dismissed her with a wave, his mouth twisting in arrogance. "Don't make excuses for me, darling. Your father knows how the game is played." He turned back to me, his tone hardening mockery, edging each syllable. "Or maybe he doesn't. Old dogs, new tricks, right?" A few diners glanced over, sensing the hostility vibrating at our table. I tightened my grip on the napkin in my lap, feeling the fabric strain under my fingers. But outwardly, I smiled. "You're under pressure," I said slowly, deliberately. "It shows." Trevor froze, his fork suspended midair, his eyes flashing with sudden fury. "What's that supposed to mean?" He snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through the room's hum. Emily's hand shot to his arm, her voice trembling. "Trevor, please." But he shrugged her off as if her touch were nothing. His body leaned toward mine, the predator's mask slipping into open aggression. "If you've got something to say," Henry spit it out. "Or are you just here to stir the pot like always?" The room seemed to hush around us, dishes clattering in the background, fading until there was only the three of us in a fragile standoff. I met his glare without blinking, my voice steady, even calm. "Careful, Trevor. Accusations have a way of cutting both ways." The words hung in the air, heavier than the scent of wine and lilies. Emily paled, her fingers frozen on her ring, her voice little more than a whisper. "Dad, don't." But her words carried no conviction. She was still defending him even now, even as he dismissed her, even as his arrogance threatened to unravel everything. That hurt more than I would ever admit, a quiet wound I carried in silence. And yet it hardened me too. If they thought they could corner me into silence, they were gravely mistaken. I placed my napkin on the table, the motion deliberate, final. The faint sound of fabric against porcelain was louder than a gavel in that moment. "I think we're done here," I said, pushing back my chair and rising to my feet. Trevor scoffed, a hollow sound, meant to disguise his unease, but I saw it, the flicker in his eyes, the tremor of doubt he couldn't mask. And for the first time that evening, I knew I'd rattled him. Emily parted her lips as if to speak, then stopped. The words trembled on her tongue, retreating behind her silence. I turned away before she could try again. The restaurant's warmth, heavy with candlelight and murmured conversations, vanished behind me as I pushed through the doors. Outside, the night was cool, sharp, alive with the restless hum of the city. Neon signs glared like watchful eyes, and the steady rhythm of traffic beat in my chest. The world moved on as if nothing had changed, but everything had. Trevor's pointed accusations replayed in my head, each one a confirmation that he was cracking. He'd lost the composure he wore like armor, and that weakness meant I was cutting close to the bone. That pleased me. Yet Emily's loyalty, her instinct to shield him even from the truth, struck a deeper wound than I'd expected. She was still my daughter, but her devotion to him had become a wall between us. That sting, more than Trevor's barbs, stayed with me as I paused on the sidewalk. I turned back once, watching the restaurant windows glow against the darkness. Beyond the glass, Trevor and Emily, bent toward each other, their movements sharp, their faces taut with either anger or calculation. It didn't matter which. Let them conspire. I had already set the game in motion, and I would see it through to the end. The next move would not be subtle. It would cut clean, sharp, and deep. The city swallowed me as I walked away, my resolve heavy in my chest. They had pushed me too far, and now they would pay the price. The next morning, the conference room on Wall Street gleamed like a sanctum of power. Sunlight slashed across the floor-to-ceiling windows, gilding the skyline in cruel brilliance. The mahogany table shone polished so perfectly, it reflected the pale faces of the men seated across from me. Trevor's investors, his lifeline, his supposed allies. I stood at the head of the table, hands steady as I opened a slim leather folder. A hush settled over the room, broken only by the faint tick of the clock on the wall each second, a reminder that time was running out for Trevor Cunningham. Gentlemen, I began, my voice calm, deliberate, every word laced with purpose. Let's talk about Trevor Cunningham's latest venture. I slid the report across the glossy wood. The pages marked with glaring discrepancies told the story of an empire crumbling beneath its own weight, profits, exaggerated losses, hidden deals already leaning toward collapse. Their eyes narrowed as they scanned the graphs, their silence heavier than any accusation. Cunningham's numbers don't add up, I said. My finger tapped the chart for emphasis. He's gambling with borrowed time. And with your money. Ellison, silver-haired and sharp, frowned. He's always been ambitious, but his tone faltered, doubt creeping in. Ambition, I replied with a thin smile, isn't enough when the foundation is rotting. The weight of truth pressed into the room. I didn't need to mention Trevor again. The numbers spoke for themselves. By the time I closed the folder, 2 of them had already agreed to withdraw. Ellison hesitated, caught between loyalty and survival, then finally gave a slow nod. We'll review our position, he said. That was enough. I had won. When they left, the silence that followed was different, no longer tense, but triumphant. Cold satisfaction surged through me. Trevor's empire was unraveling, and I was the one pulling the threads loose. Later that afternoon, I found myself in a notary's office, a cramped room smelling of ink, old paper, and something faintly metallic. The notary, a wiry woman with eyes that missed nothing, slid a document across the desk. This transfers the Upper East Side apartment into a charitable trust, she said. Proceeds will go to the women's shelter you named. I looked down at the papers. That apartment had once been meant as Emily and Trevor's wedding gift, a symbol of love, of future, of family. Now it would be a lesson, a weapon even. My pen hovered above the signature line. Emily's face filled my mind, her nervous smile, the way she'd hidden Margaret's necklace, as if she feared its weight. Could I really do this to her? The question stabbed at me, but I pressed it down. She had chosen Trevor's world, his values, his shadow. This was not cruelty. This was justice. The pen scratched across the paper, final and deliberate. The notary's stamp fell like a gavel, sealing the choice. A strange weight lifted from me, replaced by something colder. Sharper resolve made iron. Back in my office, the city humming below, like a restless animal, I checked my email. A message from Ellison waited. One line was all it took. We've withdrawn from Cunningham's deal. I leaned back in my chair, the dark glass of the window reflecting my face. Older, harder, yes, but alive with purpose. The plan was working. Trevor's fortress had cracks now spreading wider each day. And yet deep inside, I knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. Trevor's fall had to be absolute, not just a stumble, but a plunge so deep he could never climb back. And Emily, my daughter, my blood, needed to see every ounce of what her choices had cost. Only then would the illusion shatter. Only then would the truth cut through the fog she had wrapped around herself. I slid the notarized document into the drawer of my desk. Its edges were sharp against my fingertips, almost like a blade. A weapon of paper and ink, but no less lethal. For years, that apartment had been meant as a gift, my blessing to their marriage, a promise that she would always have a home. Now it was something else entirely, a lesson carved into marble and glass. As I stepped into the elevator, the polished steel doors closed with a soft thud, sealing me in with my thoughts. Their faces rose in my mind, Trevor's smug arrogance, Emily's trembling loyalty. They had lost more than they realized, and the reckoning had only begun. Meanwhile, Trevor's world was cracking. His office, once a monument to control and power, had devolved into chaos. Papers sprawled across the floor like fallen soldiers. Coffee cups, some empty, some half-filled, littered the desk. A bottle of antacids lay toppled, its contents spilled, as if even the medicine had given up on him. The air was thick, rank with sweat and the sour tang of desperation, the smell of a man cornered by his own failures. Trevor sat hunched at his laptop, the cold blue glow etching the lines of exhaustion into his face. His bloodshot eyes darted across the screen, searching for salvation where none existed. Then the email arrived, the subject line stark final. Your position is terminated, effective immediately. He read it once, twice, as if repetition could change the truth. The words burned, each letter a nail in the coffin of his career. The investors had fled. The empire he had built on borrowed time and borrowed trust had collapsed into dust. His hands shook as he slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing in the hollow room. Rage clawed at him. He snatched up his phone, dialing Ellison with frantic fingers. What is this? Trevor's voice cracked raw. You can't just pull out. Now Ellison's tone was clipped, merciless. Final decision. The numbers don't lie, Cunningham. We're done. The line went dead. Trevor stared at the phone for a heartbeat, then hurled it across the room. It struck the wall with a sharp crack, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of broken glass. His chest heaved, tie askew, hair damp with sweat. He paced like a caged animal, muttering, fists clenched. Someone's behind this. Someone's playing me. Across town, Emily stood in the kitchen of their Upper East Side apartment. The clatter of dishes filled the silence, her movements mechanical, brittle. She'd heard the call, the fury in Trevor's voice carrying through the penthouse walls. When he stormed through the door, his face twisted in rage, she froze. They've cut me loose, he spat, ripping off his jacket and tossing it onto the counter. Years of work gone. Emily set down a plate, her hands trembling. The porcelain clicked against the counter louder than she meant. Her voice, when it came, was sharp-edged with fear. You said the deal was solid, Trevor. You promised we were safe. Trevor whipped around, his eyes blazing. Don't start, Emily. I'm handling it. But the hollowness in his voice betrayed him. She saw it now, the cracks, the weakness. Her anger flared, her ring catching the light as her hands clenched. Handling it, she snapped, her voice rising. We're drowning, Trevor. What did you do? He turned away, muttering about enemies, about conspiracies, as if naming ghosts could shield him from blame. But Emily's stomach churned, her heart hammering. For the first time, she saw him not as her protector, not as the man she had defended against her father's warnings, but as a liability dragging her under. And across the river in my quiet Brooklyn home, I sat in my old armchair, the leather creaking beneath me. A tablet rested on my knee, its screen glowing with a news alert. Cunningham Group collapses amid investor exodus. I read the headline twice, then again, savoring each word like a slow sip of fine whiskey. My lips curled into a smile, but it was sharp-edged with years of betrayal. Trevor's empire was rubble, exactly as I intended. My eyes drifted to the photograph on the side table, Emily as a little girl laughing in my arms, her curls catching the summer sun. For a moment the victory soured, cutting both ways. She was hurting now, wrapped in the ruins of the man she had chosen. And I was the architect of that pain. But she had made her choice. She had turned away from me, from truth, from loyalty. She had chosen Trevor's world. I closed the tablet, the screen going dark, my reflection faint in its glass. The battle was won, yes, but the war was far from over. Trevor had fallen, but Emily still clung to him, blind to the devastation. The next move would not just dismantle Trevor's world, it would shatter hers. Only then would she understand the cost of betrayal, and only then would she remember whose blood she carried. The house was quiet, holding its breath in the dim light of dawn. Its familiar creaks and groans had always been a comfort, but that morning they sounded more like farewells. I rose slowly, steadying myself as though the walls themselves might try to hold me back. Outside, the city waited, its lights still glowing against a gray Manhattan skyline muted by a veil of low clouds. I knew what had to be done. One final move. A stroke that would not only end this war, but carve the truth so deeply that Emily could no longer ignore it. In my office, the phone felt heavy in my hand. Make sure the letter reaches Emily Cunningham by noon. I instructed the courier service, my voice measured, unwavering. It's urgent. The envelope sat on my desk, its thick paper sealed with red wax. Inside lay the notarized document, my last gift to my daughter. Not the glittering Upper East Side apartment she had once dreamed of, but a lesson written in ink and consequence. That apartment once meant as a symbol of my devotion was gone. Its sale now funded a women's shelter built in Margaret's name. A tribute to the woman who had taught me love was sacrifice, not display. My hand lingered on the desk, tracing its edge as though grounding myself. Cold logic had guided the decision, but that didn't make the cut any less sharp. I could still see Emily on her wedding day, the way she'd stood silent while Trevor mocked the necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. She'd chosen him, his pride, his hunger. Still, she was my daughter. Could I forgive her? The question pressed against me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. Across town in the apartment she believed was hers. Emily opened the door. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. The courier handed her the envelope. Its weight startled her. Paper shouldn't feel so heavy. She broke the seal, her fingers clumsy, and pulled out the letter. The words were cold, final. The apartment had been sold. The proceeds gone, given to strangers she'd never meet. Her dream home stripped away with the sweep of a pen. Her breath hitched. The paper trembled in her hands. No! The word was barely audible, a fragile denial. She sank into the nearest chair. The room suddenly hostile, the mirrored walls reflecting her disbelief, mocking her grief. Her voice cracked as she called Trevor. "Dad sold the apartment," she whispered, choking on the words. "It's gone, Trevor. All of it." He stood across the room, already packing boxes, half-filled their life, unraveling into cardboard and dust. He threw a shirt into the suitcase with a snarl. "Your father," he spat, "always pulling strings, always controlling." But his bravado was brittle, his hands shaking as he zipped the bag. Emily clutched the letter, her father's signature burning into her vision. "This is your fault," she said, her voice low but fierce. The words carried a weight she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You pushed him too far." Trevor turned away, shoulders hunched, his silence louder than any denial. For the first time, Emily felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, the apartment, their status, the future she'd clung to, slipping like sand through her fingers. Alone, she stared at the paper, the truth dawning like a storm breaking inside her. She had ignored her father's love. She had dismissed his sacrifices. And now the cost had come due. The realization cut deep, sharper than she could bear. Back in my office, the city sprawled before me, its pulse steady, indifferent. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Cunningham couple faces eviction amid financial ruin. The words were blunt, merciless. I read them twice, expecting satisfaction, triumph. Instead, I felt the ache of something hollow. Emily's pain was real. It mirrored the wound I carried in silence. Justice had demanded balance, and I had given it. I stood reaching for my coat, the weight of my choices pressing down like stone. Outside, the gray morning waited, and with it the price of love, betrayal, and consequence. They would come to me eventually. I knew it as surely as I knew the steady rhythm of my own breath. Broken, hollowed out, desperate for the mercy they had once denied me. The only question that lingered in the silence of my thoughts was simple when they finally arrived. Would I listen, or would I let the door remain closed, sealing them out forever? The elevator doors had shut behind me earlier that evening, like a curtain falling on a play that had run its course. Every move I had made, every paper signed, every quiet sacrifice, it had all led to this inevitable confrontation. By the time the Brooklyn house came into view, dusk had settled across the city like a heavy blanket. The brickwork of the old place glowed faintly under the tired sun, each weathered edge carrying the weight of history. Inside, the living room waited, filled with shadows and memory. The old lamp, its shade tilted slightly, cast a fragile halo of gold over the rug that had worn thin under years of footsteps. The air was calm, almost sacred. Then the doorbell rang. The chime cut through the quiet like a blade. Sharp, unwelcome. I didn't need to guess who stood on the other side. The heaviness in my chest told me before my hand even touched the knob. When I opened the door, the night spilled in along with them. Trevor and Emily. They stood on the stoop like beggars at a church door. Their clothes wrinkled, their faces drawn pale with exhaustion. The fire of arrogance that once fueled them had burned away, leaving only the ash of ruin. Trevor's shoulders, once squared with swagger, now slumped in defeat. Emily clutched his arm, her fingers digging into the fabric of his sleeve. as though he was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes were rimmed red, her cheeks streaked with dried tears. The city's hums seemed far away now, muffled, leaving only the sound of their ragged breathing. "Henry!" Trevor's voice was stripped of all the smooth confidence he once wielded like a weapon. It was raw, cracked. "We need to talk." Emily's grip on him tightened, her head bowed as though she could no longer face me. I said nothing. I simply stepped aside, letting them in. My face gave nothing away. The room grew dense as they entered, the silence pressing down like a weight. I gestured toward the couch, but they remained standing, shifting uneasily like cornered animals. "We've lost everything," Trevor admitted finally, his hands clenched and unclenched, betraying the storm inside him. "The apartment, my job, our savings. All of it gone." He forced a thin smile, the ghost of his old charm flickering for a second. "But you've got the means, Henry. You can help us. Please." The words came out as a plea, yet beneath the pleading tone I still caught the faint trace of entitlement, as though salvation were a debt I owed him. I leaned back against the armchair, my arms folded, and remained silent. My silence was heavier than any response. It was Emily who broke next. She stepped forward, her knees giving way until she sank to the rug, her trembling hands reaching out toward me. "Dad," her voice cracked, fragile and broken. "I'm so sorry." Her tears fell fast, wetting her fingers as she pressed them together. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I should have stood up for you, for Mom, for her necklace. I should have stopped him. Please don't turn us away." Her sobs echoed in the small room, each one slicing through me, stirring memories I had tried to bury. I saw not just the woman before me, but the little girl who used to climb into my arms, who once believed I could shield her from every shadow. But that little girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had chosen Trevor's ambition over her father's love. My voice, when it came, was steady and cold, honed by every wound they had dealt me. "You made your choices, both of you," I said. My gaze burned into them. Trevor mocked what mattered most. "And you, Emily, you stood beside him. You let him." Her head dropped, shoulders shaking violently, as if the weight of those words was too much to bear. Trevor opened his mouth, ready to protest, but I silenced him with a raised hand. "No more excuses. You built this ruin, now live in it." The words fell heavy in the air, final and irreversible. I turned, walking toward the door with slow, deliberate steps. My hand closed around the knob, pulling it open. The night air rushed in, cool, biting, sharp as judgment. "Leave," I said simply. Trevor's face twisted, caught somewhere between anger and humiliation, but he said nothing. He only gripped Emily's arm tighter, guiding her toward the door. She stumbled beside him, her eyes locked on mine, pleading silently for mercy that would never come. I held my ground. The door closed behind them with a soft thud, yet the sound reverberated through the house like thunder. For a long moment I stood there, staring at the wood grain of the door as if it were a gravestone. Then slowly I turned back toward the living room. The lamp flickered its glow, fragile, uncertain like my own heart. Stepping outside onto the porch, I looked up at the sky. The stars were faint against the haze of the city, but they were there, distant and untouchable. The echo of their pleas clung to me, pressing like a bruise. I had torn down their world just as they had once tried to tear down mine. Justice had been delivered, yet justice never came without cost. As the night stretched above me, vast and silent, a question stirred deep inside. Had I gained peace, or only another kind of prison? What now? The question lingered like smoke in my chest, refusing to clear. Yet the night outside seemed to whisper something I could not yet name, a promise faint but steady, waiting in the distance. By morning, I found myself seated in my Wall Street office, a place of glass and steel that had once been a symbol of ambition, now turned into a chamber of reckoning. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, breaking into shards across the polished oak desk. The city below pulsed with its usual hunger, but inside the air was still heavy with decision. A stack of documents lay neatly before me, their crisp edges waiting for the final stroke of my pen. Across the desk, the lawyer, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that carried no nonsense, adjusted her glasses and slid a pen toward me. "This establishes the Margaret Wilson Foundation," she said, her tone brisk, efficient. "Your donation will provide shelters for the homeless, scholarships for children, and long-term funding for programs that protect the vulnerable. It will outlive us all." Her words cut clean through the silence. My gaze lowered to the papers. Each line carved a future I had not imagined years ago when I dreamed of leaving my wealth to Emily. But the truth was as undeniable as ink on parchment. She had chosen a path away from me, away from her mother's values. Trevor had only fanned the flames, but the betrayal had been hers as well. I took the pen. Its weight felt strange in my hand, heavier than gold, yet steadier than grief. The scratch of ink echoed in the room, one page after another, as though I was stitching something closed, binding the torn fabric of my life. Millions carved away from the fortune I had built brick by brick, deal by deal, now redirected. Not to Emily, not to Trevor, but to those who had no one else. It wasn't revenge, it was redemption. For Margaret, for myself. My hand stilled on the final signature. A flicker of doubt clawed at me. Would this be enough to silence the ache to honor her properly? The lawyer gathered the signed documents with professional precision, yet her eyes softened for just a moment. Margaret would be proud, she said quietly. Something in me cracked. My throat tightened. I glanced at the photograph on my desk, Margaret and Emily captured in a summer long past, laughing in the garden, their faces bathed in sunlight. The frame was worn, its glass smudged from countless touches, as though I could still reach them through it. I picked it up, my thumb brushing Margaret's smile. She would, I murmured, more to myself than to anyone else. The words trembled with both certainty and longing. I slipped the photo into my pocket. It felt like a vow not to carry her as a ghost, but as a light. My phone buzzed, pulling me back. A message from the foundation's director, funds received. Thank you. Lives will change because of this. I skimmed it, and for the first time in months, my chest loosened. The city outside glittered in the morning sun, not with greed, but with possibility. A strange peace settled over me, delicate yet real. I gathered my coat, and as I did, my hand brushed against something tucked in the inner pocket. An envelope. Emily's handwriting stared back at me, looping and familiar. It had arrived days ago, yet I hadn't read it. I hadn't dared to. Apologies, regrets, excuses, whatever it contained, it couldn't rewrite the choices already made. Still, the weight of it pressed against me, insistent. It wasn't just paper. It was her voice reaching out, the voice of the little girl who used to run laughing through that garden beside her mother. I slid it back into my pocket unopened. The time for answers hadn't yet come, but the past had a way of following no matter how far you walked. Leaving the office, I felt strangely light, my steps purposeful, but I knew there was one last place I needed to go. Not to Wall Street, not to Emily. The cemetery waited, a quiet sea of stone where the city's roar faded into whispers. The air there was thick with the scent of damp earth, fallen leaves, and memory. And in its silence, perhaps I would finally face the truth I'd been carrying all along. I stood before Margaret's grave, the granite cool and unyielding beneath my fingers as I traced her name. The replica of her necklace rested in my palm, its diamonds catching the pale gray light of an overcast sky, glinting like tiny shards of memory. I had it made after Emily's wedding, a way to keep Margaret close without holding on to the original, a piece of her love that Emily had treated with indifference. This moment I whispered, my voice trembling, but steady as for us. For the life we built, for the love that never faltered. I knelt, feeling the damp earth beneath my knees, my chest heavy with years of longing and sorrow. Margaret, I breathed, I did it. I protected what we had. My heart aches, but it is steady now. Trevor, he's gone. His empire crumbled. Emily is beginning to understand. But it's not enough, not yet. The wind stirred the fallen leaves around me, whispering through the branches as if carrying her presence. I closed my eyes, imagining her smile, the sound of her laughter, in the quiet rooms of our old house. You always told me to stand tall, to fight for what is right. I hope I've made you proud. The words were both a prayer and a release. I placed the necklace gently atop the headstone, the diamonds catching the muted light like the glimmer of a promise. It was not a farewell to Margaret herself, her memory would never leave me, but to the anger, the grief, and the relentless weight I had carried for so long. For a moment I allowed myself to breathe, to feel the simple, quiet victory of surviving and acting with purpose. I straightened slowly, my eyes lingering on the stone that bore her name. The years we shared the laughter, the quiet evenings, the unspoken understanding between us remained untouched by the storms of the past months. That was my true triumph. My hand slipped into my pocket, brushing against the unopened letter from Emily. I drew it out, the paper worn at the creases, her handwriting a ghostly echo of the child she once was. Part of me longed to read it, to hear her voice, to feel her remorse. But I didn't need the words. The truth was already there. She had chosen her own path, and I had chosen mine. I returned the letter to my pocket, silent in my refusal to let her pain tether me again. I rose, walking slowly down the winding path. The crunch of gravel beneath my shoes marked a steady rhythm, a beat that seemed to echo the pulse of my own liberation. The cemetery receded behind me, its solemn quiet giving way to the distant hum of the city. With each step, the anger, the betrayal, the weight of vengeance fell away. Justice had been served, not cruelly, but with careful, deliberate purpose. Margaret's love, her strength, lived on. In the foundation bearing her name, in the lives it would touch, in the memories she had entrusted to me, and in myself, finally free. As I reached the gate, I glanced back. The necklace lay there, a faint spark of light against the stone, steadfast and eternal. Life was beginning again. The thought formed clearly, unspoken but undeniable. The sky had cleared, a sliver of blue stretching beyond the gray. I stepped into the world beyond, ready for whatever came next. My heart finally at peace, carrying Margaret with me in every steady beat. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.